14th special meeting for the school committee for the town of Foxborough. We have one agenda item this evening, and that is to review policy EBCFA, which is the face mask policy. Before we do that, I would like to acknowledge that we did receive submissions to the community inbox this week, and we want to thank all the members of our community for sharing those messages with us. Thank you very much. On to the discussion of the policy EBCFA, face mask policy. Dr. Burdos, would you like to set that discussion up for us?
Sure. So as you're aware, last week, Commissioner of Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, Jeff Riley, announced that as of February 28th, they would be lifting the mask policy mandate that is currently in place. And so as a result of that, it's being left to the local level to decide based on our own policy if we are going to align with that. That decision was made after a consultation with infectious disease doctors, DPH, and others in the medical community. So as a result of that, we've also, as we've continued to do all year, working with our local health officials, our Board of Health, our district physician, Dr. Giuliano, as well as with our Teachers Association as well. And so as a result of our own data and watching that data closely, fortunately, we have continued to see our vaccination rates increase, and we've seen our positive cases decrease. So as I have reported at every school committee meeting, I've reported out the vaccination rates by school. So as of today, I will just give those vaccination rates again because our own data is important here. Foxborough High School has now achieved 80%. The waiver that would be submitted to the state is no longer what they're looking at based on being the rescinding of that mask mandate as of February 28th. But we are at 80% for the high school. We are at 70% for Ahern Middle School. We are at 46% at the Borough Elementary School, 60% at the IGO, and 62% at the Taylor. So each week we continue to see our vaccination rates increase. So just as an example, when we look at the Ahern going to 70%, we've continued to report out on the number of students in particular that have had first doses and did the second dose to be fully vaccinated. So just in sixth grade alone, we saw a 14% increase just from last week. So that has continued. So our vaccination rates, I think that we've been for the last 3 months holding COVID vaccine clinics monthly here in the schools. So we also know from the medical professions that the vaccine is really one of our best defenses against this, along with everything else we've been saying with our mitigation strategies that have continued to be in place. We know it's so important, and our families have been really helpful in this and keeping students home when they're sick. We watch and track our attendance data weekly. We are, for the last 4 weeks, we see between an average of 5.5% to 6% as far as attendance with our students. So our attendance has looked really good. That's in some years better than what we would see this time of year, quite honestly.
Right.
So along with, we've talked about how it's a layered approach. So the increase in vaccinations, the decrease in positivity rates, right now we only have 5 cases across the 5 schools. We also have our test and stay program that continues to be in place. And we still know that things such as hand washing and sanitizers being available, and we continue to do that in all of our buildings, are still really important. So we do look at the positivity rate within Foxborough. We also know that that has been decreasing. And then in addition to that, it's really looking every single day at what's taking place in our schools. So I'd like to invite Ms. Jen Rosenberg, our nurse leader, up to the table as well for the discussion. And then also our Board of Health Director, Matt Brennan, as well. So as I'd said, looking at our own statistics, we're in a very different place than we were at the beginning of the school year when I recommended to you before the mandate came out that we should employ masks within the school building. We've learned a lot, and again, as we see vaccination rates increase, that has been, it's been a huge game changer, quite honestly.
We have seen a significant decrease in cases. January was a different story. It's actually a blur now. But even in the last 2 weeks, our cases have really declined. So that's a promising. I think it's a combination of getting to that herd immunity and also the vaccination rate of the community, which is higher than the average in the state, which I'm really proud of.
Yeah, overall, the town is in a much different place than it was. You know, excuse me. You know, before, at the climax, you know, the state would see 200 deaths a week. The state's now seeing, you know, much lower than that. Same thing with ICUs and intubation of patients. It's a much lower amount than what was, what we have. The state, as of today, 193 people in the ICU. As of at the climax, 1,009 people. So it's continually dropped. We're expecting to be in another lull. And, you know, with what we have in place, with the medicines and the vaccines, we just, you know, public health believes we're in a much better place. That doesn't mean that masks are going away. You know, still after someone tests positive, it's still part of the quarantine protocol. And it's still in public transportation, it'll be required per law. So this isn't something that just goes away. You know, we still recommend it, but it's, you know, we're not universally, you know, asking for people to be masked anymore.
So I have a couple of questions just about what policy would look like if we make a change to the policy. I don't know if anybody else, I'll start if we want. So test and stay program, would there be any changes to this test and stay policy if we take, I'm trying to work through this, but I just want to confirm. So test and stay, if you have exposure, as long as you're testing you get tested once a day, once a week, what's the?
So the test and stay policy will still be in place.
Okay.
If there's an exposure in school, if the student that is exposed is not vaccinated or has not had a COVID infection in the last 90 days, we will continue to test that student with parental permission every day for 5 days from exposure. So we will continue that. Oh, am I?
Yeah,
Sorry.
I'm getting the signal from
Okay.
the
Sorry,
man
I
in
have
the
the mask
control room
on.
that you guys need to talk a little bit closer
Okay.
to the microphone.
Sure,
if you don't
sorry.
mind.
So yes, so the test and stay, to answer your question, will be still in place. We still will be doing contact tracing to the extent feasible. Right now, part of our conversations we're having with our positive cases is we're putting it back on the index case to reach out to any friends that they might be, which is what aligns with what public health is doing. They may have been in contact with the 2 days prior to symptom onset. So that's an important piece. I think positive individuals need to be transparent and just reach out to anyone that you may have been in contact so they can monitor for symptoms. So we're doing a lot of conversations with that. We're still doing our part as far as contact tracing, lunch tables, any special needs classroom that we feel there was a higher risk, anyone that maybe would have been unmasked at a certain time. But we're also working together, nurses are working hard with parents to put a little bit of ownership on them as far as reaching out to people that they have been in contact. Because we're seeing the transmission happening out of school with, you know, maybe, you know, if they had a sleepover or basketball or so. It's definitely a collaboration, but moving forward, we will still continue the test and stay, and that's an important mitigation strategy that we will have in place.
Right. Okay. Thank you. My next question was just confirming. So right now, school buses controlled by federal law, my understanding. So that mandate is still in place. So if a student is being transported on one of our school buses, they have to wear a mask while they're on that school bus. When they get off the bus, they can take the mask off. When they get back on the bus, the mask goes back on. And that's for regular transportation to schools, that's for transportation to all activities, but there will still, because that is mandated by federal, that they still be required to wear a mask.
Correct.
Correct.
For
So,
for
and
bus
I like the
transportation.
language that Matt, had said earlier, masking isn't going away. It's just considered less masking. We're going to be masked in the nurse's office. We still are required to be masked in the nurse's office, and any student that comes in to be evaluated has to be masked. They'll be masking on the buses. There'll be students and staff that are still masked because of their comfort level or something that maybe someone at home that's immunocompromised. We are still going to see masks. And it's just like when we go into the stores today, we still see masks. So I think that's an important point to let parents know that it's not going to be all masks off. There will be.
And, we'll constantly look at the data as well, and if there is something that should be concerning, we'll obviously raise, an alarm with the town and the community and say, hey, look, this is where we're trending. Right now, we're trending, very fastly in the downward direction, and it seems to be the time that we could lighten up, but it doesn't mean that it's going to stay that way forever.
Right, so that was actually going to be my next question, which is what are we doing for monitoring, and is there any thought of what a trigger point would be on when we might have to go back to some type of, more mandated masking? And I realize I'm asking you to have a crystal ball, and yours is probably about as good as mine, but.
Right.
The state lead on these things, it makes it, I think, easier for the towns, and for risk reduction, when everyone's doing the same thing, it really helps the community rather than doing different. We'll constantly be, looking at the authorities, DESE, DPH, and find out their recommendations. Obviously, if there is a number, so if you're more likely to get COVID in a school than you are out in the general population, that would definitely be a concern where, we would raise it and say, hey, there's an issue here. We may want to look at this. So, we would be in communication just in those instances to see, which way we want it to go.
Our collaboration isn't ending here. In fact, it's probably just beginning.
Right.
And we're still going to communicate every week, consult every week. So we're going to watch those numbers very closely. I don't want anyone to be concerned about that.
Right, okay, thank you. And then my last, at least on my bulleted list, my last question is timing. I know according to the state, they said the end of February, or February 28th, right? Are there any concerns coming out of that's just following vacation week, people traveling? Your thoughts on concerns around the timing of that? Because I know other towns are considering postponing a week or two in order just to make sure that things don't spike at that. So have you, just based on what you guys are looking at, any guidance or thoughts around the timing of lifting of a mandate?
Matt and I, we spoke right before the meeting about this.
Well, so it's a tough question to answer.
Yeah, I understand.
Obviously,
Right.
there's no crystal ball.
Right.
Trends right now are moving down in a drastic direction. So, in the foreseeable future, we think that risk will be less than, what it is now, no matter. Yes, there is a small added risk because it is a vacation, and you're much more likely to get COVID around the house or around someone that a friend, a relative. So there is a small added risk, but overall, that risk is much lower than what it has been.
Okay. Thank you. I'm sure I might have more questions as the discussion goes on, but I'll open it up to any other committee members that might have questions or comments. Wow, really? I'm the only one.
Hit it all.
Okay. Go ahead.
I didn't have questions because, thank you, you hit them, and you hit them when I interjected. Sorry for being rude. Sometimes I just shout out my question. I apologize. The questions I have are related to policy language and not necessarily for the health experts who've been so kind to join us. So, I guess.
I think the only thing I would like to add too is that after a COVID infection, it's going to be required that an individual wear a mask for 5 days after they return to school. So that we're still going to follow that DPH protocol. So
Right.
5 school days?
5 days, or 5 days. So if it's the weekend.
That's what I'm asking.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
just 5 days. Yeah.
Okay, so 5 calendar days.
5 calendar
Thank
days,
you.
correct.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you for that.
Double
Okay.
digging in the details. So thank you. I don't want to be any confusion.
Yeah, no worries.
Thank you for that. Dr. Burdos, has there been any discussion from any other members of the school committee, the teachers, anybody around their feelings around the policy?
So as you know, we meet with our Foxborough Education Association bi-monthly, and so meeting with them, they are in support of rescinding the mask policy as well, understanding that there will be, as Jen said, many people who will still choose to wear a mask if it becomes optional for a variety of reasons, like she stated before. Some, maybe it's, if it were to be lifted the 28th, for another week or two, just to see how it goes. Some because of their own comfort level, because of their household situation. So I think that I've been in a high school where they've reached the 80%. I think I've mentioned that before. And I was surprised I saw more wearing masks that did not. So I don't anticipate that if it becomes optional, that you'll see all mask off. I do believe that we've talked about it is one of many mitigation strategies, but at the same time, it'll be something gradual because we're hitting the 2-year mark just about. We're coming up on March 13th, about a month from now, and 2 years of this. And there is the conversation, are people just tired? Sure, people are tired of the pandemic. It's been 2 years, but more importantly, we've learned so much during this time, and things have changed tremendously. We knew that we were waiting for vaccines, as an example, and we've seen a great response in Foxborough for the vaccination rate. We've also continued to watch, as we said, our data, but I do believe that we'll see a lot of people, staff and students, that will continue to choose to wear a mask for however long they feel that it's comfortable for them. And we will absolutely support that environment.
Thank you.
What does that sound like? to messaging to teachers and students, being sensitive, in fact, to the, and parents have brought it up to us before. You don't want a culture of fear on either at all, period, right? Because that's terrible for learning. How do you envision the messaging being to?
So we've talked about it at length through our administrative team meetings and with principals and talking with their staff and talking with their students, that there will be many reasons that people are choosing to wear masks. And just this kind of conversation as well is to respect them for choosing not to wear one or choosing to wear one. And that's the culture that will be the conversation around that, to be able to reinforce that message.
Thank you.
And then as you were talking, so in addition to the mandate being lifted by the state, does that have an impact on any of the other, I can't imagine that it does, but any other requirements around spacing, musical instruments, anything like that?
Activities.
None of that, right, and thank you. Activities and sports. Thank you for letting me skip that word.
So as an example, if you look at some of the, there's a number of high schools that have hit the 80%, and so it was optional. But then as soon as the school day was over, students that were participating in athletics had to mask back up. But that recently has changed as well.
And just to be clear for me and anybody else who isn't as clear, and that's the purview of who?
So as an example, the MIAA, I don't know if Mr. Pearson, if I can turn to you, just because you have that as far as your world that you live in every day as well.
So the MIA has stayed in lockstep with the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. So the most recent release by the executive director of the MIA from Friday said that they were going to follow suit with the February 28th removal of the mandate.
And is that, and again, I'm not asking, has the conversation been, has that conversation been that's across the board? Bassoons to basketball?
Well, yeah, bassoons would be the school district, but
Okay.
I know what the MIA did. They were in lockstep with the department from the beginning of the school year. So the two policies were seamless. They were identical. And so the MIA just, stayed with them and agreed to what the commissioner has done already for February 28th.
Okay.
And I think it's important to note that we've continued all year to follow the guidance that has come out from the Department of Education as well as DPH.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you. So
Awesome.
I would like to direct this back to our policy subcommittee. Based on what we've discussed today, and based on the guidance that we received from MASC today, if you've had a chance to see that, with proposed language to a mask policy, do you have recommendations on how you would like to approach the mask policy that we've been discussing?
Michelle, I don't know if you have something prepared or some thoughts on this?
Well, my question would be is we can just one option is to just rescind the mask policy in its entirety. And at that point, then we've just rescinded it. And there, as far as I know, there's nothing that prevents people from having masks, wearing masks if they choose to. So that's an option.
I don't know if you saw the policy here from MASC, which is the Massachusetts Association of School Committees, but it did just touch on the return to school for the 5 days. I think that that's something we may want to just mirror.
That would
and
be
clarify.
required. So I think that's an important distinction, Sarah. So if you were to just, as Michelle said, rescind this policy, the things that are still in place are, we still have to follow all of the protocols and scenarios from the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, which is what we've done all along. And that would include following the guidelines of masking if you're returning from being COVID positive. It would mean wearing them in the nurse's office. It would mean wearing them on the school bus. So all that's in this MASC policy is what we would be following as far as the protocols and guidelines anyway.
Right.
Right.
And
So
that's how I
that's where
interpret it as
those
well.
things change over time. And so having that in our policy, if we were going to have a policy that was going to list it, we'd have to be referencing whatever other policies are out there, requirements that are coming down that require us to do.
We would.
Right.
Right. Okay.
One thing for discussion is that if we rescind the policy, then we're without a policy. And if we reach a point, which I hope we don't reach, where we reach a point where we come back to a position where masks may be something that we want to recommend, we then have to start over with a policy versus how we've worded the current policy, which is giving us a little bit of flexibility to be timely in our response. So that's, and again, the trend I understand is that we're not going that direction, but without a policy, is there a potential that we're unprotected? And is that a big concern?
I'm looking at Michelle to see if she had some input. I don't know.
I would say I'm not as concerned on that because I would see if we're rescinding a policy that the most likelihood, if we're going to have a new requirement for face masks, is that something that is likely going to come as via the state, like that there's a huge issue and they're recommending or mandating again that face masks come into play. So we as a school committee, if there was a request for face masks to come back in, we would have to be talking about that, and that it's not something that I would think is going to be an immediate type of scenario that would happen, that would need to happen tomorrow, unless that's coming from the state.
Right.
I'd like to chime in and just say I'm comfortable with the rescind policy and adopting the policies from that are handed down by the state and the federal government, which are the 3 things that we still need to do. And Michelle, did you make the point that these policies, we would adopt them from other policies and therefore no longer need our policies? Is that what you're saying? I'm sorry. You're very, very faint.
Yeah, sorry about that. I'm actually at the high school attending another meeting at the same time or trying to. So what I would just say, we rescind the policy, the face mask policy, and whatever other requirements that the state is requiring, that we just follow those protocols. I don't know if we have to have a policy to follow protocols that are already being mandated.
Can I ask a question about the language we have in the current policy? It does say in the opening paragraph, until the current DESE mask requirement expires.
Right.
Yep.
Right.
We're
So
not-
it's kind of a question I was asking when I was going through this. Is it not embedded right here?
That this
on the
policy becomes-
28th it expires
Right.
and we flow to it? The only caveat that I'm understanding tonight is this other piece of the 5-day quarantine, that. But I still think that that's in place, even if we don't adopt the MASC, I think that's in place
Yeah.
by policy and DESE and or DPH requirement.
Right.
Correct.
So
I think we're good.
I'm kind of wondering,
Do we even need to rescind?
do we need to do anything? I mean, does that cover us, that which remain in place until the current DESE mask requirement expires or further notice? Doesn't that cover us?
Right.
I don't know, I don't know if it does, because what it's saying is the requirements in the policy change, but it doesn't say the policy gets removed. So it's saying that the current policy gets changed with that, but it doesn't say that we don't have a policy anymore, is the way I read that. Now, that could be a different, and I'm not, that's not my feelings on rescinding it or not, but the way I read that is simply that this policy is no longer accurate once the mandate was lifted.
Oh, that's, I understand why you say that. To me, in my head, and maybe I'm just reading it too literally, I think that first statement trumps everything else, whether we rewrite it or not. That's what I'm saying.
I interpreted that the same way, not being trained in the same way that you are, obviously, Ms. Raymond. But if we don't need to fully rescind the policy and we leave this here and we can still follow the guidelines of the state and don't have to write anything new, I'm in favor of just keeping this here. And if, heaven forbid, whatever, a new evil variant comes out, the Thanos variant or something, I don't know, comes out, and then if the state says, now you have to mask up again, then we say, okay. And we already have this policy. So, I don't know.
With this being at the state level and rescinding this, it's up to the local level of what we're going to do. So
Right.
that's what we need to,
Right.
Yeah.
to decide
Right. So
here.
Correct.
I agree with what I can understand
Yeah.
your interpretation.
Yeah.
That is not my interpretation of this, but I think for clarity, we should make a decision about the policy versus just let this language kind of just expire.
Okay.
That would be my preference, because again, I think we owe the community clarity, we certainly owe the administration clarity on the policy, and I don't just think, I think we kind of think we're covered by this language is not clarity to me.
Yeah, I understand.
If that's the case, then I guess my bigger interests are as follows. One, that we can, if it's the will of the committee, if we can follow the governor's recommendations on time and do that, but still have a backstop in place so that we don't have to, that we wouldn't have to wait for 5 people to clear their calendars to haggle out language to implement a new policy should one be needed in the near future, because I think that's also unwise. Because we called this meeting on February 14th, a full 2 weeks ahead of when any change would possibly go into effect, for a reason, so that we have time to edit any policies that we needed to, so that we'd be good to go by the 28th.
Right.
Right? I mean, that's part of the reason for the timing of this meeting, is so that if there's any actual changes we want to make, and I do agree with you, Rob, that I think we need to make an affirmative statement. So that's well argued.
Okay, so,
How would,
go ahead. Yes, I'm sorry.
so Brent, how would you envision having a face mask policy that's in place that can be triggered somehow if issues come up? That's
No, that's,
I'm trying to-
thank you, Michelle, and that's something I was honestly intending to bring up as a concept to the committee, specifically through your brain, to talk about in terms of the thing I like about the current policy is that it does link it to current health emergencies, and so that we referencing that, and it also, I like the clause that should need arise, the superintendent can, we've empowered administration to shift the policy in the very near term, ahead of or pending any meeting that we might need to have as a committee. So those are the two aspects I think it'd be useful to preserve.
I just can't foresee having a policy that wouldn't require the school committee to make a determination as to whether masks should be reinstated. So it either would be something that would have to come down from the state to say masks should be reinstated, or it's something that would be recommended and the school committee be part of that decision to reinstate. I'm just trying to envision.
We do have that in our language right now. It's the last two lines.
May I?
The,
Last two lines is about removing it, not, it's about being rescinded or modified by the school committee or revised at the superintendent's discretion. And that's more about taking something away rather than implementing it back in.
Excuse me, Dr. Burtis had a point she wanted to make.
I think it would be a matter of going and rescinding this policy. Rescinding the policy with the understanding that we would continue to follow DPH and DESE and all the pertinent information that we have to, such as wearing a mask 5 days upon return. That's within DPH and DESE's guidance. So by rescinding the policy, it's rescinded, but fully aware that that's what we will continue to follow all pertinent information that comes from DPH and DESE.
I agree. I agree with that.
That's what the MASC one does.
Yes.
I mean,
Yes.
it is straightforward, so yeah. I mean, rescind or adopt the new, right? We can adopt the MASC policy too, right? Or not?
Well, the MAS,
You're saying
That
rescind.
is the same thing. I think
It
that's
is.
saying
the
that-
language at the
Right.
top is
Is-
our same language.
I know.
it is.
So it leaves us in that same situation, which is this is in effect until this language changes, and then do we have that same issue of it's kind of murky on whether we still need a policy or not. So what I'm hearing from is that a clear decision on whether we still want to have a mask policy based on the mandate effective at the end of this month is where we're leaning, that we want to make a clear decision on whether we need a mask policy versus trying to alter the existing policy to be adaptable enough as we move forward. So I did have one other question, going back to the monitoring. Sorry, to take a step back for everybody. Going back to the monitoring, is that monitoring, are you self-reporting, or is that monitoring based on somebody that's physically monitoring how many days you're wearing a mask?
That is the instructions coming out of DPH and from DESE. We have to follow those instructions. So it's not a matter of somebody chooses not to wear a mask for, say, those 5 days. Those are instructions that we have to follow.
They use the language required, not recommended, so we have to.
Right, but who's responsible for monitoring that is my question.
We would, within the schools, with the nurses, of knowing, because it still has to be reported, any positive cases, we still have to report those. So we continue through all of our efforts in knowing what cases are there, test and stay, contact tracing, and then making sure that those students have the mask on for the next 5 days and following up, just as you followed up with all of the test and stay protocols and those timings and communications with families.
Okay.
And if we have another, spike to the point to where we need to pull everyone back together, I think that's what we do, just as we called the special meeting and address it at that time.
Okay.
I agree.
Thank you. So I just want to clarify, because I think I misunderstood this, and I just reread the guidance. So if you test positive, you quarantine for 5 days. Upon returning to school after the 5-day quarantine, you're required to wear a mask for 10 calendar days following those 5 days. I completely misread that the first time through, and I just want to make sure that if anybody was silly enough to listen to what I was reading or my interpretation, I had it wrong. That is the right thing. So 5 days of quarantine and then 10 days, that is incorrect.
No, so 5 more days of just masking while you're around
Perfect.
people.
Okay,
Correct.
thank you.
6 through
Okay,
10.
Got it.
Six-
Yep,
6 through
days
10.
6 through
Okay.
10.
Perfect.
And again, that's with improvement of symptoms, the shortened isolation period, and the nurses are having conversations with all of our families. You're allowed to come back to school, allowed to be released from isolation as long as you have a marked improvement of symptoms or they've completely resolved.
Right.
So we have conversations, if there's any respiratory involvement, we are asking parents to keep their kids home a day or two longer until those symptoms improve,
Okay.
just for the risk benefit.
Right.
So clearly, this is going to be a heavy task, which is not necessarily, it's just a different heavy task than the ones that you've been performing up till now, because it's easy to confuse this, as I just did twice, as a matter of fact, just confused it. So thank you for going back on that for me. Thoughts on, if we rescind, are there thoughts from the committee on rescinding effective February 28th? Are thoughts on, again, I know that other school districts are postponing it a week or two, sometimes because they need to get their committees together to do the appropriate vote, to get the appropriate input from other public health officials, whatever, or because of the timing. Are there thoughts, if we're going to rescind, are we rescinding it effective February 28th? Are we rescinding it at some point after the 20th of February?
I personally would think we should rescind it on February 20th
Agreed.
and rescind the policy. I don't even think we should adopt, just rescind the policy.
Agreed.
Totally.
Agreed.
Michelle, you had your hand up?
I was just going to say the same thing, so I agree. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. So that being said, is there any other discussion that people want to have on the mask policy and our status? So I think what's on the table right now is a proposal to rescind the policy, EBCFA, effective February 28th. And then we would just be following the guidelines that are outlined from the state and the federal government.
I would move that we rescind face mask policy EBCFA effective February 28th, 2022.
I second that.
Thank you. Any other discussion?
No, but we do need to do roll call if we take an official vote.
Yes, thank you. Okay. All in favor, we'll do a roll call. Michelle?
Aye.
Sarah?
Aye.
Richard?
Aye.
Brent?
Aye.
And we'll make that a unanimous decision. So the policy EBCFA will be rescinded effective February 28th. So Matt, Jen, thank you so much for joining us and bringing all the information. Dr.
Thank you.
Burgos, Ms. View,
Thank
thank
you.
you for all the preparation
Thank
that
you.
you did, and Janet as well, getting us.
Michelle, thank you for,
Evening. Yeah, and Michelle, thank you for joining us remotely.
from your other school committee meeting.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So,
Yes.
Thank
Thank
you
you.
all very much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you.
Janet is trying to get your attention.
Oh.
Oh, yeah. Do we have to? I don't remember that email. Again, my interpretation of emails is clearly not very good, so.
Is there, before we adjourn, is there any, we're good for that, we made a decision. Is there any communication that we need to assist you with?
I will send out something to
I'm
families.
sure you will, so, and it's best in your hands and Jen's hands, so, yeah. Just so that everyone understands, we've rescinded the policy, but there's things that
Yeah, there's,
that we're still doing for the
there's,
safety of
I will-
everyone.
there's
yes.
everything we discussed in
Right,
terms of
everything we
the
just
the
discussed.
guidance and the
Great.
way the procedures
Yes,
are going to be
I will
handled.
send that out to families this
That
evening.
has to be clear.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Burrows.
I move to adjourn.
Second.
Thank you, and Michelle is no longer with us, so we can just.
She moved to adjourn as well.
Simple show of hands.
She literally moved and adjourned.
So all in favor,
Aye.
400. Thank you, Janet,
Thank
thank
you.
you so much.
Thank you.